Greetings, friends. My name is Jessa McLean, and I'm here to provide you with some blueprints of disruption. This weekly podcast is dedicated to amplifying the work of activists, examining power structures, and sharing the success stories from the grassroots. Through these discussions, we hope to provide folks with the tools and the inspiration they need to start to dismantle capitalism, decolonize our spaces, and bring about the political revolution that we know we need.
All right. Well, Ashwin is back in the studio. That must mean we're shit talking about Carney again. I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure he's got lots to contribute, but for some reason I thought with this budget on the table, about to be passed or not passed, we have yet to unpack it. And who better to do it with me than the same person we unpacked Carney's first 100 days. Welcome back to the studio. Do you want to say hello to the audience before we start going through the numbers?
Sure. Thanks for having me again, Jessa. It's a pleasure to do this. We did some serious work some time ago to really parse through Carney's policies some time ago, and I guess now we're sort of doing an appraisal of that. I guess just for the audience, hi, I'm Ashwin, host of the International Solidarity podcast, which you can find on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts.
We'll link all of that as well in the show notes, depending on where you're listening from. Yes, I'm excited to do this with you. I actually, this morning, was going through the actual budget. It's this big, long PDF, lots of glossy photos, tables, and, I was surprised at what they were willing to put in print. I think people would also be surprised at some of the language that they use. I mean, it's not that far off from the throne speech nonsense and some of the other speeches we've heard Carney give and the promises that he's made. But to just appear in a budget document, you'll see what I mean as we kind of go through not section by section. I could go line by line. I told you that this morning. I was like, it is enraging, to be honest, when you go through the details. If you went line by line, there is a discussion to be had about all of these choices that they've decided to make. So, I mean, like broad sweeps, you're looking at $141 billion in new spending. And the conservatives will definitely be pointing out, and are, that means a $78 billion deficit. So this is the only sticking point conservatives have, because everything else is just yummy, yummy, yummy. It is everything they ever dreamed of. It is military spending. It is stronger borders. It is fewer spending on the public realm, right? They talk about public sector jobs as being some sort of disease, almost like they've spread and inflated over the years, and we've got to stop that. And it's a very, very, very right-leaning budget. So I think people need to know the details, though, because a lot of the feedback we're getting from the talking heads, like the leaders, even the progressive leaders, is rhetoric, right? They're right. It is a billionaire's budget, and it does almost nothing for the working class except give us austerity. But the devil is in the details, as they say. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, definitely concerning. A lot of, similar things that we did talk about in our last episode. A major focus on, three things, I guess, a major focus on military spending or so-called defense. Okay, that's one of the biggest things there. I think what will also concern a lot of people is the cutting back on green spending, in different domains. There's a lot to say about that. I think I've been thinking about the question of ecological transition, climate change a lot more these days, and we're really seeing sort of a divergence. If not to get too much into this right now, but you could sort of see, or at least I would see, and I think a lot would agree with me, 2019 as sort of a high watermark of the climate movement. And that's when this was really taken up in the mainstream, the Greta Thunberg movement and all this kind of stuff, and where the liberal elite would sort of score points off of recognizing climate change at a minimum as opposed to their conservative opponents. These days, in the post-COVID, post-2020 kind of era, let's just say there's been a lot more convergence between the liberal center and the right on the climate issue. In the global south, it's a different story, huh? Like, maybe we can get into this later, but China is really sort of leading the role on the question of green transition. Those are the two things so far: military and green spending. And then the third thing, which is related to sort of this cutting back on the green agenda, is it started with Carney's Bill C5, but there's a continued push to expand energy and infrastructure projects. And obviously, this is relying on Canada's existing strengths, which are in fossil fuels. So whatever uncertainty came up with the US tariffs, they're looking to make up for it and try to, I guess, de-risk from that, or de-risk those sectors of the economy by boosting spending and boosting fast tracking infrastructure and energy projects, trying to get energy products to new market, that kind of thing. So those three things are sort of top of mind for me. There's a lot of other stuff. I mean, the immigration is a big issue, and we can get to that. Healthcare spending, public service spending. I'm starting to get into these, but yeah. So maybe I'll leave it at that and pass it back to you, Jessa.
One of the things I would be remiss if I didn't correct you on your post-COVID comment, because we are yet to be post-COVID. But
yes, yeah,
I think when it comes to Carney, and when people started lapping up Carney at the beginning, we're very excited, right? We were lamenting on that even 100 days in. We're going, why are you still excited about a banker winning? But one of the things was his apparent commitment to climate change, right? If they had read the book, they had drank the Kool-Aid, and they thought at least he would be a leader here, right? And that's sometimes what sets the liberals apart from the conservatives, if they will tell us that they are climate champions, at least, rather than denying it. But the spending here is anything but. I also wanted to, folks, I read it so you didn't have to. But unfortunately, I'm going to reread some of it back to you because it's like red flags. The entire budget opens with the kind of language, the whole budget is peppered with this language of fear. So the priority has shifted from being this green energy leader to just being an energy leader and a weapons manufacturer leader, and in all the worst sectors possible, a resource extraction, like trying to find new resources that we've not yet dug up yet, to be competitive with. And it's just, it's quite horrifying. And nothing kind of says it more than the opening lines there, where it says, the world is changing profoundly and in real time. We are no longer living in an era of calm, but of significant change. The nexus between energy security, economic security, and national security is clearer than ever. And I mean, the writing isn't bad. And it really does sum up the entire budget, where they will try to defend almost everything they do and tie it back to national security. Even in the comments where we're tightening our belts, every department is going to have to find savings. There is a giant disclaimer, except, of course, for those that are protecting our sovereignty and our borders, right? And so, yeah, they keep doing this. They'll do it throughout, when they're talking about the border, when they're talking about military spending, even when they're talking about, being competitive in taxation. And they make specific reference to Russian aggression when they open up the section on military spending, right? And ensuring Ukrainian sovereignty. That is in the very first paragraph of where they go on to explain why they're going to spend $89 billion on our military, right? It is that paradigm shift. Now we have the dollars and cents to prove it, right? They are putting the money behind all of that nationalist military talk.
I guess that goes hand in hand, Jessa, with Ukraine becoming the 14th province of Canada. I don't know if you've seen in obviously this is in jest, but
I have been spared, obviously.
in many city halls, now alongside all the provincial flags, at least this is the case in Ottawa, they fly the Ukraine flag. So hence Ukraine, the 14th province. But yes, national security around Russia and things like fear mongering about that. Just wanted to chime in there. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's exactly it. It seems to be this, it's become this, it's apolitical. Like, it's mentioned in the budget as though it is like our own sovereignty. Like, it is. It goes hand in hand with that introduction on military spending and, being accountable to our allies, right? And increasing our GDP spending. So let's talk about the military spending a little bit. Let's say $89 million. What does it all mean? It's spread up all over the place, but he was quick to meet his promise on NATO spending, right? He got us to 2% almost faster than he said he would. There's a few other promises he made on the campaign trail that, like, you can nitpick on. It really just, like, he didn't invest as much as he said, but otherwise he's kept all his promises. But NATO, he's trying to impress them over there. That military spending is also very important to Trump. And so there's a lot of concessions in this budget that you'll see that are clear concessions to Trump, including the money spent at the border. But, so the $81 billion is earmarked to the military. He's already spent $10 billion. I mean, he just started this. He hit the ground running. Some folks I have in my comments going, well, the military's working class. He's spending $20 billion raising their salaries and improving their health care. And that is a stretch. I don't know if you want to hit on that at all, Ashwin, but
Jessa, did we say that
they will be well trained?
Did we say that there was $141 billion in total of new spending in this budget? Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, so in that case, if we're spending 81.8, let's say $82 billion in new spending over the next 5 years, and that's what's earmarked in this budget, that's more than 50% of the new spending in this budget. That's, by a rough calculation, almost 60% of the new spending in this budget. So that's really concerning. And then at the same time, I guess, we can and we should continue to focus on military spending. There's and the implications of that. There's a lot to say about that, but I also think we can't see that in isolation. This new spending on military in isolation from the cuts in other parts of the budget, right? So there are most public service departments are seeing a 15% budget cut. Okay, and that's obviously with the exception of the Department of National Defense, the RCMP, the CBSA. Okay, nightmare blunt rotation, and then in addition, the Department of Women and Gender Equality, if I'm not wrong, and Indigenous Services and Crown Indigenous Affairs have also been spared of these 15% cuts, but that's explicitly following, and this was reported by The Breach, explicitly following, protests and discontent and resistance posed by those groups and social movements over the summer. So the military spending comes directly at the expense of public services, and workers in the public service. There's more to say on that about how that sort of what impact that's going to have on the labor movement. That is certainly an interesting question. Jessa, I don't want to go on too long. I wanted to see if you had anything to say at this point.
Oh no, that's why I invited you here. But when we're talking about the military spending as well, I think it's important to include the fact that, he's bolstering up the border and he's just kind of generating a whole lot of, a different mentality. I thought I would get a lot more support when I pointed out online the level of military spending. And I was astonished at the amount of people, even leftists, who would argue, we're going to have to be able to defend ourselves. This is part of arming the working class. There wasn't as much pushback.
Did someone actually say that? It's part of arming the working class? Oh, Jesus Christ. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, like that who do you think is in the military? Like, those are working class people. And it's like, well, we don't control the military. We're nowhere near anything like that. This is not what it'll be used for. We're an imperialist nation, and it'll be used for those ends. And they're almost as clear as much when they're telling you in this budget where they're looking to be ready to deploy. Like they're talking about the Middle East and they're talking about fighting Russia. At no point are they actually even talking about like really protecting Canadians. They don't, it's such a fucking stretch, the arguments for it. But the point is like, this first budget is supposed to be also a litmus test of like how much we're going to push back on it. And my fear is the same thing that we pointed out when the election was on, that none of the parties really objected to increased military spending when they were campaigning. They all had it in their campaigns, just varying levels of increased military spending. And it's like the be all end all. One thing to point out as well is Carney's not just, buying new submarines and jets and, preparing us for battle or defense, Department of Defense. But he is creating a military industrial complex. We're talking about just like billions of dollars is going into, so at least we can make these fighter jets at home. And again, you'll get pushback from folks who are like, well, these will be unionized jobs. And they use that language in the budget. This is how many jobs it'll create every time we do this, that, and the other thing. And it's like, well, that's true. They will good, well-paying jobs. Some of the money there is earmarked to increase the salaries of folks in the military, workers. So I'm afraid that they've been able to write this budget in a way that it's appealing just enough to people that they're not as shocked, perhaps as you and I are, of how detrimental this is going to be, right? Like, and what this sets the tone for. So they want to build a military industrial complex. There is a department that they're going to create specifically to make sure that these companies don't have any red tape, that the procurement process is streamlined, that they are more integrated with the armed forces, right? These private military or weapons manufacturers are more integrated with our own military. And first thing I thought when I read that was about the arms embargo. And it helped explain such resistance the Liberals have been to actually realizing a real arms embargo, with no loopholes. And now you know why, because their whole budget is really framed around growing that industry, right? Where we would have liked to seen a Green New Deal, right? A shift to green energy, be leaders in some clean industries. But instead, the whole theme is, weapons manufacturers are going to make bank. Some infrastructure companies for sure there's a lot of investments going into infrastructure, building ports and whatnot. And, there will be construction jobs to be had. But, I'm worried people won't see the danger in all of it. Maybe you can help highlight some of the detriments here.
Yeah, I maybe want to start by coming back to the idea that the Canadian military is working class. And, it might be, right? Like there are a lot of incentives for folks to join the armed forces in one way or another, right? You certainly get benefits that aren't, provided as public goods, such as education, etc., and healthcare to the vast majority of Canadians. And that's how they sort of recruit people. But you pointed out, like, the working class is not in charge of the Canadian military. Canada is probably not even in charge of the Canadian military. I mean, I've heard from, and, I say that with a bit of exaggeration because, I've heard from at least one person who has been in the military and has worked sort of joint operations with the U.S. military, which is not uncommon. Canada and the U.S., collaborate in NORAD and, of course, in NATO and all this kind of stuff. And that person talks about what that working relationship is like with the U.S. military, and it's complete subordination. It's complete subordination on the Canadian side, and that comes to And so, there needs to be further sort of clarification on this. That, uh, Canadians, I think, have less of an idea of what role the Canadian military plays in the broader world. Right, there are themes of peacekeeping and all this kind of stuff, but that sort of obscures the little brother role that Canada plays alongside the U.S. in maintaining empire and maintaining U.S. led imperialism on a world scale. Canada is really a supporting character in that. It's a subordinate supporting character in that. Um, Almost entirely serving U.S. interests. Right? I mean, you can't even compare a country like Canada of 1/10 the population of the U.S. And so the U.S. really sees Canada as strategic because it's its northern buffer, right? The people, the population, can be hand waved away, but Canadian military presence, north of the continental U.S. and of course alongside Alaska, that's of strategic importance to the U.S. and increasingly so, with the melting um, of glaciers in the Arctic, opening up new shipping routes that are posed to primarily advantage commerce in China and in Russia. The Arctic sea route opens up new trade routes between China and Europe in particular. That's of particular concern to the U.S. The U.S. And the West more broadly, but the U.S. wants to keep Europe within its orbit and resist as much as it can Eurasian integration. That's also part of what the Ukraine Russia war is about. um you know I'm sort of going in all sorts of directions here, but two more things, I guess. When it comes to defense spending and things like that, okay, like the thing, and I'm very concerned that people supposedly on the left are can be neutral to this or even cheer this on, but defense spending in Canada, most of that is going to US weapons companies, right? And Trump, around the world has been trying to get people to buy more US weaponry because he's also a spokesperson for that industry, right? And a lot of weapons manufacturing in Canada as well, a good percentage of it is are branch plants of US weapons companies. So um, you know that's not to say that we should have our own sovereign imperialist weapons manufacturing at all, but a lot of this defense spending, even when we think of the $82 billion in new spending in this budget, a lot of that is going straight to American companies, when at a time when supposedly Mark Carney was elected to go against the US, and there's a lot of popular sentiment against the US, and I think rightfully so. Carney's acting in sort of direct opposition to the popular sentiment and to what people want. And the last thing I'll say on uh, supporting the so-called Canadian military is that it's not about Canadian defense. It's not about working class interests. Okay, if the Canadian military is primarily an appendage to and in supportive of U.S. led imperialism around the world, that is no friend of the working class in Canada. Okay, because and this is a really important point, and those of us on the left or otherwise need to sort of wrap our heads around this. We cannot afford division between the working classes in the West and the vast masses of the oppressed people in the global South. That division is, it's a fatal one. It only benefits the ruling class, the transnational Western capitalist elite. And here's the reason why: the Western working class, including the Western ruling class, okay, whether that's in the U.S. or in Europe or in Canada, and obviously, they've been increasingly interlinked since the neoliberal period. They draw their strength from continuing to suppress wages in the global South and to wage war and destruction in the global South. That cheapens the labor in the global South. That cheapens the raw materials, the inputs, for their production in the global South. And so the destruction of the rest of the world by war making is really where our ruling classes draw their strength from. And so that's the connection. If the working class sees its class enemies as the Canadian ruling class and political elites, the American, the Western ruling class, where do you think it draws their strength from? It draws their strength from suppressing popular discontent and popular revolt in the global South. And the prime example of this is in West Asia. We cannot divorce the genocide in Palestine, from working class struggles in the imperial core in the West, because the destruction of peoples there, and the destruction of societies in West Asia from being able to rebuild themselves, to build sovereign capacity, that directly benefits and continues the reproduction of the Western ruling class.
And that's why the nationalist sentiment and the elbows up movement, is such a problem, right? Because, and it's happened in the labor union over and over again, where, Canadian workers are needing to be, distinguished beyond American workers. And it helps build a real nationalist insular mentality where Canada first. And so that's how they will pave the way for a lot of these policies. The defense spending seems obvious, right? Defend our nation and our sovereignty. But even in the pipelines and all of these national interest projects, right? They're framing them as though they are something that the working class absolutely needs, the Canadian working class, and will benefit from. And the reality is not just that obviously the rich will just get richer because then none of these things are passed down to us. But also that most of these pipelines are owned by American companies as well. So even though you're saying you're fast tracking these in order to, make us more independent financially, as well as militarily, which you've just debunked, it's completely bogus. It's all bogus, right? None of it is aimed at protecting Canadians. And, just because we brought up the pipelines, it's worth kind of maybe talking a little bit more about the climate spending or lack of. It should have been in my big ticket items. I've kind of separated my notes into big ticket items and cuts. And this definitely falls under fucking cuts. Their departments were gutted for the most part and will probably continue to be. But it's the amount of money and infrastructure spending that is earmarked for ports. It's all basically for LNG extraction and shipping and exporting, right? As well as resource extraction. I mean, like $2 billion just to, again, like I said, start finding new gems, new resources to mine. And one of the things I think that it's a thing I don't think many people will pay attention to, because it's kind of, you have to read the line items and kind of go into the little details. But it seems to be a turning point where Carney is less interested in stopping climate catastrophe as to maybe preparing for it. And that's the language that they use in the budget. It's like they talk about being prepared for natural disasters. They don't actually really link it to the fact that those will increase due to climate change, but that we need to be more prepared for them. But then if you look in the line by line items, the only thing that they have or will spend in the next 4 years is $258 million on leasing 4 planes for 4 years that will help fight forest fires. And then they haven't earmarked any money for it, but tell their departments to start working with insurance companies to better prepare them and find out what they need so that they won't go insolvent during these years of heightened natural disasters. And so that's $250 million spent on preparing the whole entire country to face which we know is going to be more heat domes, more flooding, more, impacts from hurricanes. And I mean, I'm missing some, I'm sure, the impacts that we're going to feel, the forest fires and whatnot. And, but they put no money behind it at all. And on top of that, they've cut environmental services and this red tape. Whenever you see red tape throughout that budget, that means environmental testing, it means labor laws, it means all these codes that people have worked to mitigate the impacts of capital on the land. Or, things that slow down a project are usually things that are done for safety or environmental purposes, or like the realities that you face. But, it's at all cost kind of mentality.
Absolutely. And this is increasingly like how our governments respond to crisis, I think really tell us a lot. We saw how it was with COVID. That was a disaster. It continues to be a disaster. There's no tracing mechanism. They stopped collecting the data, for God's sake, on that, which is ridiculous. I mean, other parts in the world, more sane parts in the world, right? In Asia, I know, in East Asia and Southeast Asia, this continues to be the case, where at least you track it. At least there are still numbers that you can find on it anyway. But it's the same thing with the climate crisis, right? And increasingly, I think, for those of us that consider ourselves socialists, this is something, we need to keep front of mind, where we see the forces of capital versus the forces of progress being increasingly bifurcated on the climate question, right? Climate and our response to ecological crisis is really what's going to define the battle between, moving towards socialism or staying in a kind of dead zombie walking capitalism. Yeah, I could say more, but Jessa, go ahead.
Well, I think one of the things that kind of points to that is like the obvious gifts he's giving to big oil and gas in the budget, where it's just like it's a clear signal to them. For example, folks worked for years for greenwashing legislation. It was to limit the kind of advertisements that big oil and gas and other industries could put out that really misled people as to how green those energies really were. LNG, is still fighting that fight, but it's not even a budget item. It didn't cost them. It didn't save them. They didn't save any money by undoing it, and they just gave that to the industry. So they're open to just start bombarding us again with all of these ads like we're seeing from Ford. Everyone's so worried about Ford's ad about tariffs, but what about the one he has about the Ring of Fire, where he's basically saying the only way to save Ontario is to completely strip the Ring of Fire, parts of Northern Ontario, Indigenous land, of natural resources, right? And he's going to get a hand here in the budget too from Carney. He's promised to help with that. But of all of the campaign promises, I think that he made, that he followed through on, this is one where a lot of people will feel misled. And if there is going to be any pushback on the budget, I would think it would be around these green items, unfortunately. Like, I would love the anti-war movement to be like, what the fuck, and rise up and really push back on this imperialist agenda. But the climate crisis folks, the climate justice folks, are the ones who kind of probably held the sway of balance in the last election, that held hope that Carney would have done something. Unfortunately, the Greens, with only one MP, they're not going to hold sway on this budget too much. And May has waffled back and forth. She originally came out and said, absolutely not. Like, this is nothing. They've pushed the emissions commitments back to 2050. Complete undoing of all the promises like even liberals have ever made. And so I don't know where she's standing now, because a lot of the parties seem to think that they could spend this 1 week or 2 weeks from seeing the budget to the vote to try to wheel and deal. Like, I imagine they were trying to wheel and deal the entire time, but this is what he came out with. And I think it's a farce that they're kind of coming to us and pretending that they could somehow negotiate with the liberals and make amendments that would somehow change the entire theme of this budget, right? Which is basically cut from every fucking department, cut from the environment, and spend it on war. And I know some people are pointing out bright spots. Like, I have some of them. I gave them some credit where credit was due, but then I look back at them. Like, the housing, the whole Build Canada homes that people are really excited about. We need fucking homes. We need affordable homes. He wants, they're like these prefabricated, made in Canada homes that you can critique or not. It's not the point. They've earmarked $13 billion for that. Well, that sounds like a lot. Only when you compare it to the fact that they're spending $19 billion just on training the military and better ammunition facilities, like better ammunition training facilities. 19 billion versus 13 billion for fucking homes. And then they're taking 300 million from the health transfers to the province when none of us can get an appointment. It's 2 years for any specialist appointment. And they thought now would be a good time to cut from healthcare so that we could spend $20 billion on making sure that Army cadets are better paid and incentivized to join the armed forces. Like, there's some such glaring, deliberate choices. And I'm wondering what the masses will react like. Because we've had a week and I've not seen a whole lot of pushback.
The pushback to this budget might come from the climate folks and not as much from, the anti-military folks or the anti-imperialist kind of movement. And I think, that sort of speaks to, needing to increasingly connect those two, in our movements on the ground and to take, to, I guess, not cede the ground on, I guess, environmental consciousness, climate change, and the need for ecological transition to the center, to the liberals, small L liberals, right? We sort of have to take that up as well on our side, more than usual. Like, do we think military spending and war making is green? Like, what do we think the impact of greater military spending, greater war making, even, think about these planes. Okay, there's a lot to say about the Gaza genocide. Okay, massive destruction. Imagine all, the cement and concrete, of the buildings destroyed, what that does in terms of leaching into the ground. Also, we can't think of the environment as outside and humans as, as separate from that. The whole point, the whole understanding of ecology is sort of a relational aspect between, we are the environment, we are nature. Okay, like we are part of the ecosystem. And so when we talk about ecocide in Gaza, for example, like obviously that includes the people as well. Like that is a climate change, or I guess that's not climate change, but that is an ecological concern. So I guess what I'm trying to do here is draw connections between being anti-war and being anti-imperialist in specific, and the environmental or ecological justice side of things. And so what I was going to say even before that is, even think about one of these F-35s or one of these planes that has to fly over Gaza, or the drones that continue to buzz. How much, in the case of the planes, how much fuel does that take? And then they did that constantly every single day for 2 years. I mean, yeah, and obviously, so that's why I prefaced it in that way. That's not to diminish the human lives lost, but even if you think about the most remote and isolated example of a military plane flying, like as if the fuel doesn't come from somewhere and is not being burnt and contributing.
Maybe it's LNG fuel, so it's cleaner.
Yeah, there
and
you go.
It's Canadian, so
ridiculous.
Elbows up.
And so, so there really needs to be, a greater connection on this. And I think the one thing I'll say on this is, because also it's top of mind in the news, I'll try to be brief on this, I guess, so we can move on. But those of us on the left, I think, need to critically rethink our understanding of other parts of the world, get to know the global South better, but in particular China. And we cannot accept at face value what we've been told by our own media, the same media that has lied to us for more than 2 years about the Gaza genocide. We can't expect to believe all the same things that they tell us about China. I'll keep my, I guess, remarks, restricted to ecological transition as it relates to China, right? And I said this is top of mind in the news because of the EV tariffs. Okay, like China, in addition to being a leader in the renewables, renewable energy sector, in battery manufacturing, in other sort of green sectors, it's now the world leader of electric vehicles. Okay, and sure, we know that electric vehicles are not the solution to everything. In Canada, we'll have to reorient, our urban and suburban spaces around public transit for it to be sustainable. There's arguments around degrowth, all of that, aside for a moment. Um, uh, you know, China has really developed its EV production capacity. I mean, we've always been familiar with the U.S. Auto companies, the German auto companies, the Japanese and the Korean auto companies. Now, the biggest auto manufacturer in the world is China, and a good portion of that is EVs, and an increasing portion of that is EVs now. And why is it that out of U.S. national security concerns, they've blocked Chinese EVs from entering the US market? So we have to do that as well. We can't have Canadians, according to Carney, and of course, according to Big Boss, the US, Canadians shouldn't have cheap electric vehicles that, we, hopefully no longer have to pump gas into. Will lessen the cost of living. Think about how many cars people cycle through over a certain year span, right? And all of them being gas guzzling. If you can have a high-tech, sustainable, and cheaper car that's EV, but it just so happens to be Chinese, apparently we can't have that. And that's sort of the ongoing issue being discussed between Canada and China. China's retaliated, to Canada's tariffs on China's EVs by, China placing tariffs on a lot of canola products coming from Western Canada. So there is a chance that Carney might back down and back off of those tariffs on Chinese EVs. That would be a good move. That would also be a move in defiance of the U.S. The U.S. would likely not be happy about that. But let's have that as a starting point, right? If we're so Carney wants, Canada to be a leader in clean energy or green energy, that kind of. Why don't we start with that? And coming back to what I said on about the Western left, the left in the West and the left in Canada needs to reorient around China. Like, a lot of us are not even familiar around, like, the pace of change in China is so fast that a lot of us haven't been able to grapple with the fact there are real strides being made in green transition, in terms of technology, in terms of manufacturing, that if we're serious about green transition in Canada, and we know that the capitalists are not, right? Because their source of strength is oil and gas. That's one of the major sectors in Canada. But if we're serious as working people, as the popular forces in Canada about green transition, there should be some talk about greater cooperation with China. Otherwise, what are we going to manufacture from start? Our own green technology, our own green energy, our own Canadian made and Canadian branded EVs? Are we going to do that? Doesn't seem like it in the next couple of years. So
not with this budget.
Not with this budget. And so there's a major need to sort of rethink our understanding and relationship with China, particularly on the green question.
Carney's budget does talk a little bit about exporting food and, taking our energy out to market. But it's really, I think, a lost opportunity considering what he thinks his mandate is, right? But all in all, he ran as and is now ruling as really a conservative. And so, China, they have to play a certain villain role. Russia is playing that very role in order to facilitate this type of spending. Before we kind of get into, we'll speculate on where we think this budget is going to drop in terms of the vote and a little bit of the reactions that we've been getting. I'm going to skim through just a couple of the line items. $1.7 billion to hire more RCMP officers. This was always promised. It's not a surprise. Another $90 million just to make sure their cadets are paid more as well. Now, this is earmarked under the border security hoopla in the budget, but you can bet your bottom dollar will be used to make sure that those national interest projects are safe from protesters and Indigenous land defenders. That is notoriously what they're used for. And since we know that those are ramping up, with $51 billion in infrastructure, they're not clear on the details of that infrastructure spending, although it does include ports, roads, transit. There's a high-speed rail Quebec to Toronto that they're going to speed up in terms of building. But you can bet again, a lot of that infrastructure spending is going to go towards facilitating those projects, right? That the ports are not for travelers. Those ports are for goods for the most part. And I have a feeling even the investments to the meteorological. I knew this would give me trouble.
No, that's it. Meteorological.
Thank you. Agency in Canada, they are getting like 1 something billion dollars, and I have a feeling that's just like better radar and satellite that we'll know the big storms are coming, and any possible Russian jets. But other terms of big line items that benefit us, there's almost none. Again, unless you count those housing dollars, but that's a pittance compared to what the cities need, what the provinces need in order to build these houses. You know, we're talking about, this is a federal budget that's supposed to go right across the country. So, and then one big thing we did an episode about, they're spending $1 billion on an AI fund. So this is something Carney's very passionate about. He's willing to, it's not as much money as he promised he would spend on it, but he's saying he's going to get a lot of private investors. So we know he's just absolutely intertwined with this industry, and he's going to use it to facilitate more layoffs in the federal, in the public sector. I'll link the episode and all the reasons why that's not a great idea. We don't have time to unpack that right now. But tax cuts also, you know, this is a line item that it counts under spending. It's lost revenue. Ashwin, he's not even going to tax luxury yacht sales.
That's
like,
ridiculous.
tell me you are.
That was not necessary.
No, it's like the greenwashing legislation. You could do other things under the table that would benefit the Westons of the world that we would never even really know about. That would need serious digging and number crunching and like tax rebates, and like they can get their money. But this is openly telling Canadians to start worshiping billionaires again, or that he is of that class, and like we will not tax them. They will not have to pay for this. We are going to entice people to come, you know, be tax competitive, as though billionaires will flock here, and that's a good thing. But yeah, so middle class tax cuts, people might start to get really excited about that. You know, we're running a giant deficit, but we're also offering tax cuts at the same time. I know, you know, it's expensive living. We can't afford shit. But, you know, the people who can't afford shit are going to save like $20 a year on those tax cuts. The people who make like $300K a year, they're going to save a lot more. So again, even the things that seem to look like tiny little green flags, they're really not. And like, I hate being that person, but all of that eventually comes out of the services we, used to rely on. I don't know if anybody relies on them anymore. And there's absolutely no money earmarked for the disability benefit to increase over the next 4 years. So, you know, we've got money for the CBC and Eurovision. I'm not a hater of CBC, but they are getting a big influx of funding. And they're just, you know, greenwashing a genocide as well. But, Eurovision is being considered, but not another dollar for disabled folks, and less money for healthcare. So I don't know how the conservatives are talking about not voting for this. That's what? You guys love deficits. Don't lie.
I was just gonna quickly say Eurovision. That thing is actually insane. Like, are we part of Europe? Like, do we want to? You know, and
well, if
again,
Israel can join, why can't we?
Exactly. So that's what I was coming to. Like, this is just a plain old racist kind of thing, right? Like, the Israelis are European, the Canadians are European. You know, like, I mean, you know,
Western vision.
Yeah, there you go. And if you know, I guess, you know, don't hide it. That's okay. You know, better for us to see the truth. Why would Canada? Anyway, that was a passing.
Well, they're saying the quiet parts out loud now. They don't care.
Yeah.
They just don't care. Other kind of cuts, just other cuts that people should know about. You know, when we say public sector layoffs, we're talking 40,000 jobs, mostly unionized, well-paying benefit jobs. That we're talking like that's more than 10% of the workforce. That's huge. One story that, you know, I will link the podcast for the breach or the transcript, whatever folks will consume there. But Martin Lukash relayed an interesting story that I'm just going to quickly recap for folks because I think it spoke volumes that, there's already been a lot of layoffs at Public Health Agency of Canada, and they're facing the same kind of cutoffs, the 15% across the board. They're going to be heavily hit, which is crazy in a time like these. However, they showed up to work the other day to see a job fair in the lobby of their building where they worked, a single employer job fair. And I asked my partner, I go, and I've been ranting about the budget, and I go, who do you think the employer was that was enticing them to leave their job and go elsewhere? And he just looks at me, the military. And I was like, yeah,
nice,
yeah.
You got it right.
We call it the Department of Defense here. We don't call it Department of War just yet, but yes. So if nothing screams paradigm shift than, hey, nurses, pick up a gun. Who need healthcare workers? Who needs doctors? We're going to start training our bureaucrats so they can fire straighter, and we're going to give them better bullets. And somehow that's going to help your daily lives because the Russians are coming. And I can't make this up. You could go and read it 400 pages yourself, but quite literally, that's what it says. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but it's just, it's quite something. It's quite something. And it seems like none of the parties really like it, but still the vibe seems to be that it's going to pass. Do you want to speculate, or do you, what will happen likely Monday?
We were talking about this before hitting record, and honestly, I'm not so sure. I mean, there are things sort of seem to be in place in terms of, how, in addition to the Liberals, there are two other votes that are needed. But if all the other parties are already in place, unless something sort of changes, then I don't know. I'm not sure.
I know. So yeah, May, doesn't matter what she does, not really, unless there's another floater somewhere. This is a confidence vote for folks who, just to get the lay of the land. That means if this budget doesn't pass, we go to an election. All right. And, the NDP, they're arguing publicly on whether or not this is true, but they're $23 million in debt. They do not want to go to an election. They probably won't even be eligible for certain loans because they're not official party status. They're counting on rebates coming back from the last election. But as far as I know, they did not hit the threshold in most of the ridings, and they sure as hell didn't hit it nationally. So I don't know how many rebates they're actually going to get. And those rebates should actually go back to the locals who spent the money and need to spend it again if they do call for an election or vote no. Saying what I've said, it's hard to imagine that the Workers' Party, or the most progressive choice, would vote for this or even abstain. But Don Davies, he's the interim leader for the NDP right now. And he went online on his social media feed and already started bragging about some local spending that was in the budget for his riding, a Filipino community center. And he did an entire video announcing it, celebrating it and taking credit for it. So he had been in discussion in regards to the budget and seemed to got what he was asking for, right? Then they had a chance to vote down the budget in that back and forth that they do in the House with amendments. Conservatives asked for an amendment after Poilievre fucked up, and he didn't even get to do his amendment first, but who cares about that? But either way, they finally did make an amendment. If it passed, it would mean that the budget did not, and they voted that down. So the media started reporting, it looks like the NDP are going to support the Liberal budget after all. And Don Davies came out and said, no, we haven't decided that yet. They're going to be in a caucus retreat, I guess, as we speak over the weekend here. And it's going to be something we're all holding our breath for. The Conservatives say they will not support it. They absolutely won't support it. So it is these two votes, although the reason they only need two votes is because an MP immediately saw this budget and crossed the floor. He loved it so much. So whether that happens again, whether they fail to whip the Conservative vote, who knows? Who knows if the Conservatives would want to go to an election with Pierre Poilievre at this point? the way he's being received. He's, just fucking up all over the place. Doesn't seem very popular, struggled to even get his riding in the first place. And nobody seems election ready at this point. And if everything they say is true, all this fear mongering, and we're, ready for a Russian invasion, and the Americans are just wreaking havoc with our economy, and there's fentanyl streaming over the border that needs to be stopped right now, then, like, is that the environment to send it to an election? Can you go back to your base and explain why we're going to go back to the polls again? That would be a bit of a tough sell. So, I mean, if I were to hedge my bets today and perhaps look like a fool next week when folks are listening to this, I would say it does pass, for the reasons that, almost everyone campaigned on a lot of this to begin with. It's not that far of a stretch from the shift we started to see during the election.
I maybe we just wanted to come back to the stuff in the budget regarding immigration and refugees, and that's that there are provisions in this budget to cut the number of refugees coming in. That's it's interesting as a side note that I'm seeing a lot more anti-refugee I mean, I guess anti-migrant more broadly, but anti-refugee in specific rhetoric. You hear here and there that the refugees, they're getting so many benefits from the government. What do I get? That kind of thing. I would say to those folks, you're looking in the wrong place. Look at your boss. Look at the companies that employ you. Look at how much you have to pay at the grocery store, and those people who have monopolies, right? The Westons of this world that are ripping you off. Anyway, so they're cutting the number of the refugee intake. They're also cutting in half international students coming to Canada, and I think they are cutting in half as well the number of permanent residents that are admitted. And these are some things that I maybe briefly want to talk about. With international students, it's interesting. The international student economy, which I've written about to some extent, has really been an exploitative scheme that is essentially a wealth transfer from the global South and India in particular to Canada. Like at one point, I think in 2023, something like 2/3 or 60 something percent of post-secondary institutions operating income in Ontario was coming not from international students more broadly, but specifically Indian international students. I mean, that is ridiculous. And of course,
they lured them here, right?
That's right. Mm-hmm. And they essentially collect rents off of super high unregulated international tuition rates. And with those super high international tuition rates, what they do is reinvest that into marketing schemes in places like India and other global South countries to attract people. And a lot of these students are ripped off by these recruitment agents as well. Not to mention when they get here. But the thing about the international student economy is that it created like sort of a hyper precaritized, because of everything that I'm saying about the cost of tuition, about the cost of travel, about the cost of living here. It created a hyper precaritized underclass of workers that we would see everywhere in the essential sectors of the economy. So what's going to happen now that the international student tap is being halved, right? There are two things. One, who's going to do it's interesting to see where labor is going to come from. In these most fundamental sectors of the economy, you can obviously think of Tim Hortons, you can think of others, restaurant and services, logistics, trucking, this kind of stuff. But you can also think of what's going to happen to the universities and post-secondary education, because for the past at least a decade, and certainly more than that, as post-secondary institutions across the country have been receiving less and less provincial funding, what they've been doing instead is ramping up how much they charge international students, their international tuition rates. So international tuition rates have been, or international tuition has been increasingly making up a greater share of the revenues that post-secondary institutions generate. And so essentially, when you cut the number of international students in half, that directly impacts the operating budgets of post-secondary institutions. Are the provincial governments going to come in and fill in that gap? Obviously not. So what's going to happen to um, you know uh, uh, you know post-secondary education? So this is another terrain on which struggles can be waged. Why is it that we rely on people from the global south to fund our public services? That quite literally, there's a term for that. It's called social imperialism, where you get social services by doing the imperialism. The other thing is with PR cuts, right? Permanent residencies is being cut in half. I'd maybe just like to quickly read a bit of the statement from the Migrant Rights Network. This is their response to Carney's budget. So I'm just going to read here, quote, "By not increasing permanent residency targets, Budget 2025 continues to deny rights and protections to the people who sustain our communities and who are already living and working here," unquote. I want to read another line, but that's an important point. With international students, you're cutting the tap, and so you're halving the tap, and so the number of people coming in is halved. But with permanent residency, these people are already here. They've, in a lot of cases, they've met their requirements and they've just been waiting. I know people personally over the past years. They've been in this pool waiting. They've met the requirements. They're contributing to the economy. Unlike what a lot of people say, they're paying their taxes. If you spend money on a Tim Hortons coffee, you're paying taxes in this country. Okay, so they're here. They're contributing to the economy, and yet the number of PR spots is continuing to shrink, which means a lot of these people are going to have to return back to wherever they had come from. And I know several people who have already been in this case, people that are in my community that were close to me, that they never ended up getting PR, and their current visa is essentially was going to expire or had expired already. And that gives people two choices: either you have to go back and restart your life elsewhere, as as is the case with some people that I know, or you go underground and you become undocumented, which is even worse. So just reading another section of the statement, quote, "While permanent residency targets remain at 380,000, this represents only a fraction of the 3 million people currently residing in Canada on temporary permits. The vast majority are excluded from equal rights and protections because they do not have PR, permanent residency, creating a two-tier system that facilitates labor exploitation. Rent inflation went up 4.5% year over year, despite a massive reduction in study permits in 2023 and 2024. But the federal government continues to cut study permit spots further. So 3 million people in, having temporary permits in a pool, chasing less than 500,000 permanent residency targets. So that's, that's a crime. That's atrocious.
And it leaves the people remaining open to higher levels of exploitation. So they try to frame
Absolutely.
this as, international students were also getting, not a fair deal in terms of the educations they were getting and the money that they were spending. And they'll frame it often as they're trying to prevent this exploitation, when in fact they're just making it easier. I can't remember if you mentioned it or not, but it was also 10,000 cut in the amount of refugees coming here.
Yes.
That should enrage folks as well, not for the reason that there's so many more instances around the globe where refugees are being created, usually through complicity or direct action from Canada, in terms of, our resource extraction projects and our participation in what's going on in Palestine and whatnot. But they are the United States. So the United States is almost completely cut off the ability to apply as a refugee there. They're taking almost only white South Africans, I kid you not. And they are openly hostile to all migrants in their borders with what's going on with ICE. And at this point, rather than opening our doors and saying, come here and contribute to our communities, we are closing our doors as well. And Europe is doing the same thing. You can only imagine what this is going to mean for folks that are trying to flee economic, climate, and military disasters at home. So there's a lot of red lines in this budget that should be enough for a party like the NDP. I can't speak for the other ones. Pieces is, I don't expect the Conservatives to do anything noble. But the NDP, there's 7 of them. There's not much to lose at this point, right? Yes, another election would probably bankroll them, but like there's zero principles existing here within the party, within the whole legislature at this point. So like who will stand up for refugees and migrants? Apparently nobody, because nobody has flagged that as a major concern. Who's going to stand against the imperialist machine that Carney's creating in the industrial complex? Like nobody seems all that bothered by that either. You know, they are focusing on important things like the fact that oil and gas will still be subsidized, or, you know, have subsidies, and there's projects that are going to go through unceded territory that, you know, will be a detriment to our entire environment. But, you know, none of these seem to be red lines. Like I don't see one party holding on to anything or really highlighting anything that's critical. Like the Bloc is talking about Quebec's not in the budget, and you know, it's a big disappointment, I think, watching folks wrangle around the budget and the possible votes. But maybe I'll be pleasantly surprised. I want to read a statement. Migrant Rights Network are always on top of it, and you read some great quotes. The Wilderness Committee did a great breakdown of the climate policies and the impacts versus the promises that had been made. But one of their quotes, I think, sums up the budget really well. It says it reads like a war plan against people and the planet. And I don't think there's any other better way to describe what that is. And I would have thought a lot more people would have just rejected it outright.
You know, even I guess just I think this is a moment. This should signal to us, you know, the need to get to higher stages of organizing, to, you know, ramp up our resistance to measures like this, to show opposition. I mean, obviously, it works, right? When, you know, the capitalists, they're very organized, right? Like the oil and gas sector and all this kind of stuff. And of course, you know, it's a different story with them. They have institutional access, they have resources, all this kind of stuff. So that's sort of what we're up against. But this really does show the greater need for organizing around these key elements, right? There's so many cuts to public goods, right? We didn't even talk about how even the fact that there's no, you know, barely any spending on new social goods, you know, that means already a kind of effective cut because of inflation, right? The prices of things have gone up. So obviously, if there's not more money in the budget to account for that, you know, that inflation, then if the effective social services being provided is actually being clawed back. So, you know, and, you know, following up on, you know, the immigration thing, you know, in a lot of Western countries, including Canada, much of the economy, much of the fundamental sectors of the economy are run by immigrant labor. And so what is the move here on the part of Carney? Like, you know, so essentially you have a right-wing backlash against immigration. The economy is bad. Housing is bad. So, you know, quote unquote Canadians turn against immigrants and scapegoat immigrants. Carney then responds by reducing immigration, which is, you know, our pool of cheap labor in Canada, which then, you know, continues to pose a danger to the Canadian economy by shrinking it, right? That makes the economy worse, which then, you know, feeds the cycle again. You know, that sort of just feeds the cycle of scapegoating immigrants or whomever else once more. It strengthens the right. The other thing I want to say is that the cutting of public servants and public sector jobs, that's very important too, because that's the sort of the bulk of the labor movement in Canada is in the public sector. So if you cut those jobs, you're essentially undercutting and undermining as well by proxy the labor movement in Canada. And then the last thing I want to say is, at the beginning you talked about how this is really a right, and throughout this is really a right-wing agenda. Supposedly the Conservatives should actually be happy with a budget like this. And, you know, that is the Liberals trying to undercut the Conservatives and try to, you know, stake out their ground. That's going to force, you know, the Conservatives to move further to the right. And of course, you know, this is still a neoliberal budget, i.e. that, you know, these are still massive handouts to the capitalist class, right? And to the elite, while, you know, drying up and clawing back from regular people, making life less affordable to live for regular people. And so what's that going to do? That's going to create a lot more disaffection. That's going to strengthen the right. When you've had a liberal government now for since 2015, up till the present 10 years, that's going to induce. So we're in for an even bigger kind of rightward shift. So the rightward shift alongside the undermining of the labor movement via cuts to the public sector, via or in addition to the cuts in immigration that then shrinks our economy. These are in addition to the cuts to healthcare, other cuts here and there. This is really sort of bringing us to close to a breaking point. And we as the left and as the multiracial kind of working class, we need to have a sense of what the road ahead is for us, and the exact kinds of things that we should be responding to, and what is the organizational infrastructure thus needed to respond to that.
For me, it's hard to imagine that it lay in electoral politics. Seeing what we're seeing with the amount of energy that we need to expend in order to get anywhere. I mean, even talking about those departments that were able to stave off the 15% budgets by like massively organizing and backroom dealing, whatever happened there, like they're still facing cuts, like exactly like you explained. And it's thinking of the Conservatives having to go further right, particularly, I start to imagine if we went to an election, right? If this budget is voted down, and then we had to watch the Liberals and the Conservatives then out-campaign each other again to the right, right? And it just starts to get worse and worse, and then I start finding myself, do I start cheering for this budget? Could it be worse than this budget? And I obviously could always be worse. I mean, the Breach again made a great point there that we'll steal from them, but quite often the first budget isn't the most shocking budget. Anyone in Ontario knows this to be true. Doug Ford's budgets have gotten worse and worse every year. So the amount of pushback that they face right now, not just on line items, right? Like not just like, oh, well, can you include a little bit of spending on this and then I can consider supporting it? No, like go back to that Wilderness Committee quote, like this says something and it's the wrong something. It's so far from the type of messaging and narrative and, focus even on the economy that we actually need, that, any politician worth their salt should be doing everything to shut it down. But also, this just adds another thing for the movements to have to tackle, and I can understand why maybe folks aren't spending a whole lot of energy specifically on the budget, because it's just kind of like part of a larger problem that, we're facing from all levels of politicians. Increased austerity and kind of a technocratic rule. It is the trend across Canadian politics, global politics, as much as we like to separate ourselves from the South. So although I don't look forward, I definitely don't want to cover another election. Please, no. Even covering the NDP leadership race a little bit has me just shaking my head. But the one thing I did want to say, and folks are always assuming I'm with Eves' campaign. He came on the show. I defend his right to, play shenanigans with NDP brass. Like the more they fuck with them, the happier I am. Honestly, I care not if you follow the rules, like at all, obviously, like the podcast. But the fact that when he came on the show, he was adamant to me. I mean, the messaging has shifted a little bit, but he's like, look, I don't think I'm going to win. I don't even think they'll let me in the race. I want to make sure we are challenging imperialism. I don't think anybody out there is going to make a big enough deal about what Carney's about to do, about this shift in military spending and aggression that Canada is going to be contributing to. And I want to be at least that one voice. Like if there's any way to bring this issue to the federal level, like on a national level, or people are paying attention, then I'm going to use this opportunity. And the fact that anybody now looking back at what this budget is doing, like stealing from folks to pay for the military, and you can't give any credit to that campaign for trying to do that, while watching all the other ones just talk the same lines over and over again about how they're just going to center working class people, and yet that means nothing. Some of them are coming out with policies and whatnot, but not one of them has even attempted to eat into this massive paradigm shift that's clearly happening in front of us, right? You think little piecemeal things and nationalized grocers. Well, that's fucking great. But with what money and under what circumstances with this rise of fascism and this massive increase in militarism? You know what I mean? Like, that is an issue that you just can't pretend it's not going away. And I think because they don't know where a lot of Canadians sit, we're not seeing enough people challenge that, right? They're typical politicians weighing cost-benefit analysis, and where Eve is just like, I don't give a fuck. I don't give a fuck. Like, you don't like me, obviously, I've lost you anyway. This is what I'm going to talk about over and over and over again until you all pay attention. And I wish that his campaign had been taken a little bit more seriously, or maybe he had gotten in the race, like, officially earlier. I'm not, like, coming down on their strategy at all, but just that is missing from the conversation. And if there was ever really value for, the NDP now, it would be to be at least that lone voice against this shift, right? A clear voice, even if it meant losing first. Because I think, like, not that I want many people flocking to you, but it would help build the base back up, right? Like, to stand out with some sense of principle, something different. The same way the conservatives will try to be like, no, we are far more right-wing than that. I mean, they're going to be fucking stretched to find another dollar to spend on things that they would rather, right? Like, what, they would make greater cuts to the health transfers. Good luck with that. So, yeah, it's a telling time for Canadian politics, and I think it would be a good time to have somebody really stand affront to this, rather than let it just... I think it'll be kind of a non-event. It's going to pass next week, and that will be our new reality of spending for 4 years, and we're fucked. Like, I'm sitting at the kitchen table reading through this line, especially the climate, and I'm like, we're fucked. We're fucked. They're not even going to prepare anybody for floods or fire, like, nothing. They're like, we will have soldiers. We'll have more soldiers.
We're fucked in one way, but I never want to, because I feel like in the West we're we're already so, like, black pilled, and we're already so, pessimistic about stuff, and I also don't want that to drive us into complacency, because there is a role that we can play, and we don't have a choice. We have to organize against this, and there are wins, right? I mean, even just the small wins that we mentioned about the the mobilization against 15% budget cuts at the Department of, the Department for Women and Gender Equality and, Indigenous Services. That shows that, there is a certain level of agency that can be exercised by us, by the masses. And we should use that. And the way we use that is by better organizing and, being more effective in our organizing. And so that's really the task ahead, and this is, we have to, in our organizations, in our, understanding of things, we have to resist the capitalist timeline, which is, what's going to happen tomorrow and what's going to happen the day after and the next quarter. But we have to, look ahead a couple of years, right? The healthcare cuts are starting 2028, or, they really take their impact, by the end of the decade, 2030. So we should have some sense of what life for regular working people will look like by then, and construct our horizons for organizing around that. And of course there are challenges with that. There are immediate challenges, but we need to get to work, I guess.
Absolutely. The only thing we can do is use the conditions that we have to our benefit. This should be a time where the movements could coalesce with each other. They've all been screwed in this budget. And on top of that, you have, his promises to crack down on hate speech. And we know what that really means. If you've listened to the show, it means dissent. And he's promised, a clear way for these projects to go through, which means cracking down on the environmental movements, the climate justice movements, seeing them as a threat to the national interest and framing them as such. And so, if there was ever a time to just morph all of the movements into one, the way that folks attempted to do with Draw the Line, or are attempting to do with Draw the Line, where, our enemies are common. The issues are varied, and the legislation we need and the changes we need are kind of all over the place. It's a laundry list. But the one thing, the shortest list of all, is like our list of enemies, right? It is capital, it is industry, it is imperialism. I know I just said 3 things, but it's really all the same thing, right? And so getting people to stop punching down is a start in terms of organizing, right? Finding a way for people to punch up. Tenant organizing is a great example of that, where there's a clear enemy for folks to mobilize around. Sometimes it's not always so clear cut. So, but Carney, we could just put a face on it for now. It could just be Carney and his banker buddies. Peter Thiel is starting to get demonized deservingly. So we'll have a few more faces to add to the Weston wall of shame of, oligarchs and technocrats that gotta go along with their ideas. Yeah.
That is a wrap on another episode of Blueprints of Disruption. Thank you for joining us. Also, a very big thank you to the producer of our show, Santiago Halu Quintero. Blueprints of Disruption is an independent production operated cooperatively. You can follow us on Twitter at BP of Disruption. If you'd like to help us continue disrupting the status quo, please share our content, and if you have the means, consider becoming a patron. Not only does our support come from the progressive community, so does our content. So reach out to us and let us know what or who we should be amplifying. So until next time, keep disrupting.